Welcome to the South Yorkshire Local Heritage List. My name's Sarah Cattell and I'm the Project Officer for the Local Heritage List at South Yorkshire Archaeology Service. This video is here to give you a bit of information about what the Local Heritage List is, why it's important for South Yorkshire and how you can get involved. If you have any questions, please let us know by either using the contact form on the website or alternatively you can email me direct on my email address on the bottom of the screen. So what is a local heritage list? Well, local heritage listing is nothing new. It's been going for quite a number of years, but unfortunately the coverage across the country has been quite patchy. Some local authorities have local lists, others have partial lists, and others have absolutely nothing at all. So we're hoping that this project is going to be able to solve that problem for us in South Yorkshire. So the local heritage list is a register of locally listed heritage assets. So that can be things such as historic buildings, archaeological sites, monuments, parks and gardens, landscapes, anything with a historic connection that people value as contributing to the distinctiveness of their local area, but are not already recognised as part of statutory national designation. So things such as scheduled ancient monuments, historic buildings and registered parks and gardens wouldn't come under the remit of locally listed assets, because those things already have a degree of protection nationally. Inclusion on the local heritage list enables the significance of these historic places, whatever they might be, to be recognised and be reflected as part of the planning system and hopefully protected, so that any planning decisions that are made that affect the heritage asset or its setting will take the heritage asset into consideration and its value to the local community. So the background to the project comes from October 2019, when the government decided to launch a very ambitious campaign to get people involved with their own local heritage, and this took the form of the local heritage list. They realised that the coverage was quite patchy, and so they wanted to try and address this. Initially there were meant to be 10 local authorities involved in the project, but due to the popularity of it, there's now 22 of us all involved. But the most important thing to remember about the local heritage list is that it has this community element. We want you, members of the public, people who know heritage assets and might walk past them every day on their way to work or drive past them on the way to school. We want you to be able to nominate these heritage places for inclusion onto the list because they're places that you value and that are valued within your community. As a result, that means that the local heritage list becomes a reflection of what is valued by local people, as opposed to just a list that's been compiled by other people elsewhere. So what does this mean for South Yorkshire? Well, it gives us quite a lot of opportunities in South Yorkshire to have an input into the decisions that are being made about the local heritage assets in our area. And that means that we can directly affect them by nominating assets for the local heritage list, or alternatively by commenting or by adding information to the assets that are already locally listed. It also takes into account those places that have previously already been locally listed as part of neighbourhood and local plans and things like conservation areas. So the local heritage list will be in conjunction with those already highlighted elsewhere. As I mentioned earlier, it also gives those heritage assets that are on the local heritage list a degree of protection as part of the planning system, and more importantly, the information that is generated as part of nominations to the local heritage list will also be incorporated with our local historic environment record for South Yorkshire. So it means that even those places that don't make it as far as the local heritage list, the information will not be lost and not be wasted. It will still contribute to our understanding of South Yorkshire as part of the historic environment record rather than the local list. As I say, those assets that have already been recognised as a part of local or neighbourhood plans, they're also eligible to be locally listed, and the local heritage list for South Yorkshire will complement these rather than overriding them. So it means that we'll have all of these local heritage list items across the whole of South Yorkshire. The only thing to bear in mind is that a small area on the very far western side of South Yorkshire is actually covered by the Peak District National Park Planning Authority. And because this is all to do with the planning system and is linked to the planning system, what it means is that places in that area won't be covered by the South Yorkshire Local Heritage List. However, the Peak District National Park Planning Authority still very keen to hear about any interesting historic assets in those areas, although they don't at the moment have a local heritage list. So this is the area that is covered by the Peak District National Park. You can see that there with the lines across it. So if your locally listed asset or your chosen asset lies within that area, that means that you'd need to get in touch with the Peak District National Park rather than this South Yorkshire Local Heritage List. However, we'd still be very happy to hear about any of this for our historic environment record as well. So feel free to let both us and the Peak District National Park know, because we're always keen to learn new information. So how will it all work? Well, there is a process, and that process will mostly be done as a part of the website on which you're viewing this video. So there's a few stages to it that allow us to be able to look at the list, identify what you want to do, and then be able to do it. So in terms of getting things onto the local heritage list, there are 5 stages that we'll need to go through. So the first is to identify the asset. So this could be any heritage assets. It could be somewhere that you know really well, it might be somewhere that you visit regularly or walk past regularly, or it might just be somewhere that you've seen on a bus journey or a train journey that you think is really special and needs to be protected if it's not already. So it's a case of deciding on what asset you might want to nominate. Then you'll need to check the criteria. We have a list of assessment criteria that can be viewed on the website, and that allows you to see what assets are eligible for the local heritage list and what criteria they would need to meet to be able to be included. Then you'll need to write your nomination form. So the nomination form is also available on the website, either from the map or the list page, and I'll be able to show you that shortly. Then we'll go through an assessment process. So once nominations have been submitted to the website, they will go to an assessment panel who will then view all of the nominations that have been made, judge whether or not they meet the criteria as necessary, and then if they do, they will be put forward to be judged by the planning boards for each of the 4 local authorities, which will make the ultimate decision as to whether these places are adopted onto the list. Once that happens, those places will be added onto the list and they will then formally be locally listed, giving them the protection that we're hoping. So, identifying your asset. What do you need to do? Well, the main things to remember about identifying heritage assets and getting them onto the local heritage list is that these places need to be distinctive. They need to be somewhere that's special in your local community. They need to be somewhere that people will know about, that people may have seen before. It might be a very rare version of something that you don't find elsewhere. So it might be a particular building style, it may be a particular architectural style, it may be an archaeological site that perhaps has evidence of earlier life that doesn't appear in other places quite so often, or it may be a really, really good example of something. One thing that it does have to be, though, is valued by the local community for its heritage. So there's a slight overlap here with community assets and heritage assets. So what that means is that a heritage asset is something which has that link to history, whereas a community asset might be something like a community sports hall, or it might be a park or something like that. But if it's not got that heritage link, if it's not got that historic connection, it wouldn't fall under the remit of the local heritage list. However, you might find that your local heritage asset is also a community asset as well, depending on what it's being used for at the moment. So the two sometimes do mix, but it's important to make sure that your chosen asset has that historic connection. Then you need to check the criteria. So all of the criteria are on the website. You can have a look at that. They have their own drop-down menu, so you can have a look at all of them. And what we've done is taken the Historic England criteria that they've suggested in their guidance on local heritage listing, and we've looked at that. We've also looked at criteria that's been drafted for both Barnsley and Doncaster, and we've put all of those together and tailored those to suit the needs of the heritage assets across South Yorkshire, because different assets will have different criteria attached to them because they're all very, very different things. So what we've tried to do is make sure that of the 7 criteria that we look at, so that is age, rarity, historic interest, archaeological interest, community interest, also group value and landmark status. And those things are all going to be slightly different for different asset types. So the age of a building will have a different bearing than maybe the age of an archaeological site. The rarity of a park or a garden may be different to the rarity of a monument. So each one of these criteria have been looked at carefully. So you'll be able to see on the website the criteria for different asset types and different criteria within that. So you'll be able to have a look at those before you start your nomination form and make sure that your chosen asset actually meets those criteria. Then you need to write your nomination form. The most important thing about this is to do your research. As you'll see when you get onto the website, the nomination form asks you for a little bit of information in relation to each one of the assessment criteria. And it's really important if you can give us that information for each one, because it means we have as much information as possible to be able to decide whether or not this particular heritage asset is suitable for inclusion on the local heritage list. So as much information as you can find out about the place would be brilliant. It might be somewhere that you already know an awful lot about, in which case the nomination form will be quite easy to write, whereas it might just be somewhere that you've walked past and admired for a long time but you don't actually know much about. So there is lots of ways to be able to research your nomination and lots of places you can find out information. A good place to start, again, is on the website. If you have a look at the how-to guides, there's a lot of information there about how to research historic assets and how to find out as much as possible about them. So do check the website for help. But one of the other main things to remember is to make sure that your research and the information you include on your nomination form is relevant to the criteria and to the asset itself. You might find lots of really interesting information that is fascinating, but actually maybe some of it doesn't necessarily help the case for the historic asset. So it's something to think about to make sure that you include the stuff that's really relevant to your nomination rather than just all of the information that you find. So it's always worth having a little look through your nomination before you submit it and make sure that each one of the criteria have been given some sort of supporting information and that information is relevant. And then finally, we go to the assessment stage. Once your nomination has been submitted on the website, it will then go to the assessment panel. So this will be a group of people who'll be made up of local conservation officers, there'll be members of South Yorkshire Archaeology Service staff, and then there'll also be a collection of local heritage experts from across South Yorkshire. So these will be people who know lots about buildings or landscapes, and there'll be archaeologists, there'll be people who know things about monuments and public art. So we're hoping that all of these people will be able to have a look together and make up our assessment panel, and they will then look at each one of the nominations against the criteria and judge whether those nominations really do meet the criteria that's necessary for inclusion on the local heritage list. The way we'll score it is that out of the 7 criteria, we will ask that any inclusions for the local heritage list must score at least high in 3 of those criteria, medium in 2 criteria, and then whatever the scores are for the others. That way it means that those assets that don't necessarily apply to each one of the criteria won't be disadvantaged by the scoring. So for example, archaeological sites won't necessarily have a great deal of architectural interest. So it means that if we were scoring every single criteria, archaeological sites would be at a disadvantage. So we don't want that to happen. So we're scoring each criteria, high, medium or low. And as I say, you must get high in at least 3 of the criteria, low in medium in 2, and then the rest can be low, or you may have more high or more medium, whatever it is, depending on your asset. But once it's been assessed by the assessment panel, then it will go forward to be adopted, hopefully formally, by the local planning committees and planning boards. So what we'll be doing is taking our list of candidates as recommended by our assessment panel, and it will be going to the local planning committee or the local planning board in Rotherham, Doncaster, Sheffield and Barnsley. We're not quite sure yet, we're still trying to work our way through exactly how it will work, but our plan is that they will approve the nominated assets this time around, and then from then on we're hoping that the assessment boards will then be able to give us the delegation responsibility to be able to let the assessment panel choose which candidates can go onto the local heritage list. But that's something that we're still working through with them. So it might be that we see the planning boards more often, maybe once or twice a year, or it may be that we just have to see them once and they can then delegate responsibility for that to our to our assessment panel, who will then meet probably quarterly. And I've put here at the bottom of this slide, don't worry if after all of this hard work your nominated asset doesn't quite make it onto the local heritage list. It's not the end of the world. Firstly, it might just be that there wasn't quite enough information, in which case you can always resubmit your nomination with a little bit more information onto it if you can find any more out. Alternatively, if it doesn't make it onto the local heritage list, all of the information that you've given as part of your supporting statements for the nomination form, all that information will go straight towards the South Yorkshire Historic Environment Record. So even if it doesn't make it onto the local list, you'll still be enhancing our understanding and our knowledge of the history and heritage of South Yorkshire, because it will be held just in a different place, that's all. What are the benefits then to having a local heritage list? Well, actually, it's a really, really good thing to have. And for it to cover the whole of South Yorkshire, it means that we can have a consistent list for all of our 4 local authorities. But the real main points of interest are, firstly, it gives direct access by the public. So what it means is that you no longer will need to be in touch with your local councils and have to wait for their processes before any ideas that you might have about local heritage listing can get to the right people. Because you'll be doing it all through the website and the councils are linked to the website, it means that all the information goes directly to the right place and the right people. So what it means is that if you see somewhere you feel should have protection, and you feel is a really important heritage asset, you can get straight onto the website, you can put your nomination together, and that will get straight to the planning committee in the right local authority. So you won't need to worry about having to get to the right people and finding out the right information first. It's also really good for searching, so it's easy to find information. So what that means is that because the website is here to be able to show you all the local heritage list as it stands, it means that if you ever need to know anything about a locally listed heritage asset, it's all there on the website and can be easily found. All you need to do is just search the list, either using the map or the list itself, and you can find that information. So that's really helpful for anybody wanting to know information about their local area, anybody who might be doing projects with school or college. It's also really important from a development point of view as well, and anybody wanting to put in planning applications for the development anywhere will be able to have a look at the local heritage list first and find out if there are any locally listed assets nearby. Local heritage lists are also recognised in legislation as well, which makes them really important. So it's not just a list of places that we quite like. This is actually places that have been recognised as part of legislation and within the planning system, and that these places will then be protected as a part of that. So it's not just a case of being somewhere that's quite interesting, it's a place that is now recognised in law. It also means that the local heritage list is consistent and accountable. It's consistent because we use the same criteria for all different assets, for all different asset types, and it means that the same criteria are used across that wide spread, so that all assets will be judged fairly. It's also accountable in that we've had a consultation period, so that people who are part of local heritage groups and local civic societies and that sort of thing have been able to view the criteria before and approve them, but also the local councils have been able to do the same thing. So we'll be able to explain why we've come to the decisions that we've come to as part of the assessment panel based on those criteria. And finally, and most importantly, it helps protect heritage assets through the planning system. So this is one of the main benefits of having the local heritage list for South Yorkshire. It means that all of those places that we know and love, and we have a lot of those in South Yorkshire, that we're worried about, or that we are really keen to make sure that they never have to be demolished or anything like that, then that way we can protect them through the planning system. So that's the most important part of the local heritage list. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know if you have any other questions. Have a look around the website, see if you can find all the information you need. Have a look through the list and see if that's it. See if your locally listed assets are already there, or maybe think about putting a nomination together. And at any point, if you need any help or support, please do get in touch with us, as I say, through the contact form, or you can email us directly. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.